Salam and good evening to you, ladies, gents and Pikachus. Welcome back to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, once again we'll be breaking this thing down verse by verse into factual, logical statements in English so that we can understand who or what is Allah, what does he mean by the contents of his book, and more importantly for us, how does this affect us as non-believers in our lives in the world today. So as I always do before I start, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any doubts as to my factual accuracy or the things I'm about to say, please first buy and read and translate an Arabic Quran like this one, not an English one like this one, because as we're about to find out now, this one is not the same as this one, despite them both saying in the front that they are the one and only universally documented divine word of Allah. So, with that in mind, let's get started. We're going to go back to the previous 8 lines that we went through this morning, but rather than go through the 8 lines in Arabic, which is the word of Allah, we're going to compare them to the 8 lines given in our Western English version Quran, which, as we know, if we've been watching the previous episodes, we'll know, this one here is very inaccurate and pretty much says the opposite of what the one they actually believe says. So, with that in mind, let's carry on. Oh, I'm really going to enjoy this. And a little bit of pretext to you is I've spent most of the day, probably 2 or 3 hours today, fishing through, deleting and blocking really rude fake accounts led by Islamic people and terrorist-style Muslims giving me death threats, laughing at previous threats that I've encountered or violence when I was attacked and a man tried to kill me. And their entire justification for this is that I have been lying about Islam. Despite the fact that every single word that I have said is in here, and I've translated it accurately, I've given the verses, and I've even said, buy it and read it yourself. So what does that tell you about their honesty and their integrity? I'll let you decide. So anyway, let's get back to where we were. So as we found out this morning, AL-NIISA, the Book of Women, in the words of Allah, has very little to do with women. What it has to do with is how Allah is going to profit through his Muslim men using the orphan girls and their sons and daughters as props, as prostitutes and as employees. And how they're not really allowed to keep much of the money. You have to give them the odd bit here or there. But the main takeaway is they have to be equally poor and they're not allowed to argue with you. If they do, slap slap, beat beat, shout shout, let's hope they kill themselves so we can take the money off the dead body. And that's expressly described. So with that in mind, let's read from the English one, starting at verse 8. But at the time of division, you know, the division of the inheritance on the dead orphan, but at the time of division, if other relatives or orphans or poor people are present, give them out of that property and speak to them words of kindness and justice. Isn't that a thing? Kindness and justice. There's absolutely no mention of kindness or justice in this. In fact, I distinctly remember that it says something about burning in coals if you do not obey and fear only Allah. But let's continue. There's more good stuff to be had in the fake Quran, the English Quran, which doesn't at all resemble the real one. Verse 9. Let those disposing of an estate have the same fear in their minds as they would have for their own if they had left a helpless family member behind. Let them see Allah and speak the appropriate words. That's brilliant. So we've gone from in the red one saying you must command these poor orphans who you know, whose mother has just died and you've taken all their money, so they're now your slaves. You must command them in the ways of Allah. You're their teacher and they're not allowed to speak back to you. So you basically got to bully them into being Islamic. But the English one, again, says the exact opposite of that. Have the same fear in your minds as you would if your own family had left a helpless member behind. Let them see Allah and speak appropriate words. So there's no fearing Allah. There's no teaching them with the shaking of a fist and berating them. And there's certainly no demanding that they don't speak back to you. None of that stuff's in here. So I can say what's happened here is they've translated the fullness of the verse, and then they have meticulously picked out words and then rearranged a couple of the words and then changed the grammar so that it presents the opposite. So this is literally the opposite of the word of Allah, which is this one. Because remember, he only speaks in Arabic. And I remind Muslims, O ye Muslims, he says, do not try and interpret his words, because thou will never understand thy writings, because you know nothing and he knows everything. And by the way, if you're not observing and obeying him fully, you are an infidel. So that means anyone who's following this one not only is not following Allah, they're actually following a lie, and that makes them an infidel who will burn in the everfire. Which props up my earlier speculation that Allah wants you all to go to the everfire. That's his plan for you all. Let's carry on. Verse number 10. Those who unjustly eat up the property of orphans eat up a fire into their own bodies. They will soon endure a blazing fire. Oh, this is a little bit more similar, but like I say, they've really changed the complexion of this, because those who unjustly eat up the property of orphans, that's the opposite. In here, it was saying that orphans that unjustly take money which they're not deserving of, especially if they're retarded orphan girls, they don't get any money, according to this one. But then in the English one, those who unjustly eat up the property of the orphans. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. When we went through the Arabic one, the orphans don't get any property. The orphans are the property. But if you only read English, and you hadn't taken the time and the effort and gone through the death threats and the violence like I have in order to know the truth of Allah's actual word, you would never know this. And wouldn't you just know, when I'm reading this one, nobody calls me Islamophobic, nobody calls me a racist who hates Arabs. But when I read this one, all of a sudden the guns are drawn. The swords are out. I'm an Islamophobe and a racist, simply for repeating the words of this book in English. Because I'm not praising up the religion. I'm not covering the sins of my brothers. I'm just speaking the truth, which is the opposite. Verse 11. Allah thusly directs you to regard your children's inheritance, to the male a portion equal to that of 2 females. If only daughters, their share is 2/3 of the inheritance. That's completely the opposite. It's literally like, wait there, I'm going to literally grab the bit of paper that I got from this morning's reading. Right, let's compare and contrast, shall we? Just to make sure I'm getting this right, because this is unbelievable stuff. So, what I have from the Arabic copy for verse 11, in hearing of inheritance for those left behind by dead mothers who die, each daughter has 1/3, yet a boy gets 2/3. Oh, sorry, I kicked the camera. Each daughter gets 1/3, yet a boy gets 2/3. And if there is only a single daughter, she will get half, and to the guardians both a further 1/6, which would have been for a son should they had left a son. But pay the debts to your mosque first, and also charities after, as you must fear Allah. Do not have any discussion over what Allah hath ordained, be it so. That's exactly what this one says, word for word translated. But then we go back to the English one, and we find that it says, Allah directs you to regard your children's inheritance, and the male a portion equal to 2 females, if only you don't have more daughters. If you have more daughters, their share is the 2/3. So this one is saying if you have more daughters than you have sons, your daughters get more, they get 2/3. But if you only have sons, they only get 1/3. And it makes no mention of the fact that you're giving all of it to charity first, to the mosque, and then afterwards. It certainly doesn't say anything about how you can't argue it. This book is a lie. This book is literally a lie. Anyone who is trying to learn Islam, do not learn from this book. This book is not Islamic. This book is Islamic propaganda. This book is to lead you away from the truth of Allah's word, which is this, which, by the way, makes you an infidel. But if you are non-Islamic, reading both of them is going to be the way to discern the truth of the lies and propaganda these people are actively pushing against us. And we move on. 12. In what your wives leave, your share is half. If they leave no child, but if they leave a child, you get 1/4, after payments of legacies and debts. See, where it says legacies and debts, it's very generalised. But we know from reading this, the legacies is giving the money to your own family that you've taken off the dead orphans' children, and the debts are going to the mosque as mosque charities. So in this one, it's making it sound like, oh yeah, you're being really fair, you're giving back to the community. Whereas in this one, it expressly says you're taking from the community and you're giving it to the mosque, or you're keeping it. And remember what the punishment is for arguing. You're burning in hell forever like a lump of coal in fire. whereas this one neglects to mention anything about coals or fire. Let's move on to 13. So, in the accurate Arab reading, 13 says, Allah commands this, and Muhammad will be thy watcher, as he is Allah's messenger. Deny it, and you shall burn in hell as infidels. So obey your Lord, and he may yet admit you to his paradise garden, lest ye yet may triumph. Then we compare that to the English one. These are limits set by Allah. Those who obey Allah and his messenger will be admitted to the gardens with rivers flowing beneath to abide therein, and that will be a supreme achievement. It's literally the opposite on every verse. Like, think about that. This one is a threat. The entire thing's about commands and Muhammad being your watcher, you being an infidel and burning in hell, and you may be admitted to his paradise gardens if you do all the things listed, and it's only may. It doesn't say you definitely will. Whereas this one doesn't have anything in it about fire, and it says you definitely will be admitted to the gardens, and then replaces the entire second segment with gardens will abide with rivers flowing beneath, and that will be your supreme achievement. It never says that in the Quran at all. That's completely made up. And then we move on to the last verse, 14. Shameful torment and disgrace for all you who do not listen to Allah's commands. Will you dare transgress against Almighty Allah? He will send you to burn in fire like a coal forever, and none shall come to your aid. So that's very specifically 100% aggressive and horrible. Let's see what's next in the English Quran. But those who disobey Allah and his messenger do transgress, to abide therein, and they shall have a humiliation. That's it. No burning in coal, no infidel fire, no one coming to your aid. You shall have a humiliation. It makes it sound like someone's going to go, oh, I don't like you much, shame on you. So, on that evidence, and we're not going to read any more because I think this video will get extremely long if I'm reading both Qurans to you. But just keep in mind, these are like black and white. These books are opposite. This is the real one which Muslims actually read from, where Allah explicitly tells you, this is my word because I am speaking only in Arabic, says Allah in the book. And he also says that any translation is the work of Satan, which is this one. So I wonder, if this is considered to be the work of Satan, why it has a stamp in the front of it that clears it as an officially usable Quran. Why has it got a preface? Why has it got Abdullah Yusuf Ali, who is an eminent Sunni scholar, writing for 2 chapters why the value of this book needs to be preserved for all times? If, indeed, Allah was telling the truth, and this is the real one, and no translation should be considered because they're from Satan. So maybe what we're supposed to take is this guy is Satan. Is that what they're telling us? So an eminent translator and prominent Sunni scholar, Abdullah Yusuf Ali, is this guy Satan? Is that what you're telling us? Or is this guy Allah? Is Allah Satan, who writes all of this nonsense, trying to defy us and confuse us and trap us within bad interpretations with this one? Because imagine if we went into debates with Muslims and we'd only ever read this one. Straight away, A, we're going to get everything wrong. B, they're going to know that we don't know what we're talking about because they'll recognise the false verses of which we will be speaking of. They will be able to tell us that we poorly translated it, so we haven't done the work, we're lazy and sinful. And they'll be able to tell us that our interpretation is wrong, giving them a platform to speak openly about this one in nice, kind, polite terms and brainwash anyone who is listening who hasn't read this one. Which is exactly where we are today in the world. We have Muslims brainwashing everyone in the West to think that if anyone like me fairly criticises or reads accurately from this one, we must be racist, we must be Islamophobic. We're definitely not doing it for our own good, for the good of society. We're definitely not trying to preserve the morality and the standards of our culture here with thousands of years behind it. No, none of that matters. All we're doing is slagging off Islam because we're nasty, evil infidels and Christians and Jews who are bad and should go to the evil fire. It's Allah who's got the right ideas. It's Islam that's got the right ideas, not us. How do we know about our own countries? What do we know about culture? That's the impression that we're being presented with here. So, in summary, as we come to the end of this video, I'm going to say once more, Allah and his Quran of the Muslims is 100% misleading every single person who reads this book, Muslim or otherwise. And if you need any proof, buy this one as well. Compare the two like we just did, and you will find this is the exact opposite of this, despite the fact that they both claim to be the accurate, divinely, perfectly preserved word of Allah. And that's where we are. So that's the end of this video. Hope you enjoyed that and you learnt something. That's all for now. We'll be back tomorrow at 7:15 AM with more Without Lies, Islam Dies, where we'll read the Qurans of the Muslim, both of them, and we'll get to the bottom of this swindling of the Western culture that these Islamic terrorists are purveyors of. And that's what I'm going to call them from now on, because this kind of stuff, despite the fact that it's evil, the behaviours that they are doing today, in addition to what's in the Quran, that is what the terrorist is doing, using the internet, using propaganda, using us as weapons against our own culture. And we must say no to it and make sure we are wise as wolves but gentle as doves in our approach, so that we can put this to rest and conserve our morality, our culture, our beautiful, secular, peaceful and moral society, which makes theirs look totally shameful in comparison. And that's the end of this video, so I hope you enjoyed that and you learned something. God bless, and I'll see you, lovely people, in the next one. Bye now. Islamophobic, my backside. We need to come up with a word which equals Islamophobic but only applies to us. Oh, that's right, we've already got one. Racist. That's what these people are. So anyway, I'll see you tomorrow. Have a lovely evening. God bless you all, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.